Black revolutionaries, distillery owners, Italian fashion retailers, and Motown Grammy winners all share their best stories never before told in any other media outlets on Detroit is Different. Visit DetroitisDifferent.com or download the Detroit is Different app on Apple's App Store or Google's Play Store.
Starting over, but still in effect, the Detroit is Different podcast studios here, Kari Frazier. Once again, 2019 has not been one of the years that I'm rolling out the content, but I'm starting with some high content, some information for intellectuals. We're talking about reading. We're talking about books. We're talking about things that make up the fabric of the culture of Detroit. Detroit is Different is built on the culture of Detroit. I think it's a lot of cool things here. It's a lot of different things you can get into, but the best thing about Detroit are Detroiters themselves. And here we have people from the Source Bookstore, a bookstore that features authors that come in, and actually one of Detroit is Different's best friends of Zenobia Jeffries is big buddies with the Source Bookstore. It's one of her favorite places on earth, as she's an avid reader, reading stuff all the time, suggesting books and commenting on books and talking books. And most of the books she's talking are from these two wonderful young ladies here in full effect at the podcast studio. So how are we doing today?
We're doing great. Thank you.
Doing great. Thanks for having us.
Thank you. Thank you for being here. So this is going to be a different type of interview because as much as it's about people generally on Detroit is Different, this is kind of going to be about a business. This is a big year for the business. What's so big about the business this year?
Well, this year marks our 30th year of book selling in Detroit.
That is phenomenal. 30 years of selling. Well, really, being in business, as I always tell people, a lot of people look at businesses that make a lot of money as that's the testament of being in business. I look at businesses that stay in business the longest as the testament of business. So 30 years.
Yes, 30 years of serving the community. And I always say the community are all the people either who walk in the door or in our early years when we were selling books at events such as bazaars and fairs and church basements and such, whoever walked up to the table was the community. And even to this day, our community is from many, many places. And anyone who walks into the door at our now brick and mortar location on Cass Avenue is the community.
All right, so let's get into the story of, like, this will be the first time I'm like interviewing a business. So the birth.
We're people, actually.
I know, but it's like I want to give it as if the business is coming to life. So this will be kind of like an anamorphism, sort of. But along with that, let's talk like what was the idea, like opening the business 30 years ago. A lot of things were different in Detroit, the culture, the landscape, certain things. But certain things have remained the same.
Well, actually, we didn't have an idea and then we dreamed it up and we did it. What happened is that we had opportunity and courage. So that's the hallmark, really, of our starting the business. I didn't ever think that it would grow like that because we started by going to where people had events, as I said, in fairs and bazaars and church basements where they invited vendors to come and set up a table, and we sold books across the table like that. And that was our first of incarnation, I call it, because that was, since we've been in business about 30 years, it's about 10 or so years that we did that.
Okay.
And then we graduated to being a member of a collective of 3 women-owned businesses where the old food co-op used to be. Some of your listeners might remember the old food co-op on Cass and Willis. So when that was vacated about a year later, 4 of us went together and joined together to share the space that was there. We started with 4 and then we became 3 because our 4th person really did need more space. And so I was there, the store was there for 10 and a half years until the building, which is the Auburn building, which is now on Cass, closer to Canfield, was built. And they were looking for merchants who had been in business for a while. And I said, well, I fit that category, so I'm moving across the street. So that's how we got to where we are today.
Okay. So starting off vending, and now it's like they'll say like pop-up shops and things like that.
No, we were never a pop-up. The pop-up idea is that you set up and you wait for people to come.
Mm-hmm.
But in the early days, we were really considered people who came to a place that was already going with people,
Mm-hmm.
and brought our goods to the people, which I really liked the differentiating that concept, because we are always going to the people. Now we have people coming to us now, but then we're always reaching out to where people are and offering what we have.
I think even in the early days, our DNA was with us. So we're a nonfiction niche, and we focus on categories like history and culture. So where there might have been one of our books here, like Ivan Van Sertima's They Came Before Columbus. During our early days, he was out speaking in Detroit, and we had a lot of people reading him and other people like Chancellor Williams' Destruction of Black Civilization. The authors were actually visiting the city.
Mm-hmm.
And so we had a lot of people reading history at that time. And we also would fend for the Ascending Church of the Cosmic Christ. So we had a lot of metaphysical books that we were selling to them. And so when you look at our store today, you see our major categories, our history and culture,
Health and well-being. Books that are by and about women.
And metaphysical or spiritual.
And then just recently we added the arts as a category, even though we'd always had books about art, about writing, about how to create things. And so we've added that just recently.
Yeah.
Okay. And this idea of going to the people, and I'm guessing traveling with where the authors would be,
mm-hmm.
and then having the information so people could walk away with it.
Mm-hmm.
Early on, what were some of these events? What were some of the places that stand out in memory as like, okay, this people are truly galvanized by getting these books?
Yeah.
Well, my mother took a trip to Egypt,
mm-hmm.
and she went on a study tour. So on a study tour, you get a book list and you read particular books that help you with the trip. And there was a group at Central United Methodist Church that wanted to know more about the trip. So how to know more? Then you get to read the books. So we were there offering the books that were from the study tours list, so others could read it.
And they were having a bazaar around Christmas time, and because we had a little class with them, they said, "You're always bringing these books to us. We don't know where to get them, so why don't you just come on and get those books and bring them to the bazaar, and we'll buy them, and that'll be that." Well, that was that, but then it really opened up an opportunity for us to go to other church fair bazaars, street fairs, people that had events going on at parks and other kinds of places. So we just had a lot of places that we could go where people had gathered. I remember going to a event out in way far out. It was past Southwest Detroit. It was still Detroit. And I think it was at a Seventh-day Adventist hall. They were having a bazaar. And to this day, there's a woman that I met there who reminded me that she bought a book on beading. And she said it was the most expensive book I'd ever bought, and I think it was $25 at the time. But it was a very large book, and and she tells me today that she holds it dear. That that's one of her books that really helped her along her way of creativity, and she does things in the arts arena. So we would go wherever there were notices about offering vending spots for people to come to, and we would just go and take our books in the car and pull up and spread out and sell our books.
Okay, and then also the mother-daughter combo of this, Janet, Alyson, that combo is that love for books always been in the household? Was it just always like, were both of you all always book lovers? Were you people in the library that like the librarians were like, oh my God, it's coming back?
You go.
Well, my mother's mother was a librarian. And my mother became a teacher and I became a teacher. So I guess we've always been around books, and the value of what books can bring to people is always present with us. More information, more understanding.
Mhm.
That's what we want.
Well, she lived in the house with me. When I would go and she didn't have any place to be, she would go too. Now, she was old by this time. She wasn't really a baby, but because had been with the school district for a long time. But during her teen years, she would go with me sometimes. And then she went off to college and I was on my own. Then when she came back from college, she had other things to do. And then over time, we just sort of melded together as a pair with the store. And then we've added people to help at the store. We have 2 other part-time people. We have some others who work on the outside. They don't really come in the store that much. So altogether, I think if I were to count right now, there are about 10 people who really make the store happen now. So it's just not us alone. But I always say she's the brain and I'm the muscle.
Well, I'm sure, because that's the other thing.
Mhm.
And the reading too,
Yes.
selecting the books that people will respond to.
Well, the first part of that, I think we would say that we curate carefully what we have based on our categories of books that we said. But we really have to choose based on what we wish to offer the public. Because nobody can read the mind of people to know what it is they want. But the response that we get from people who come in the store say, wow, I see books here I don't see every place else. Wow, I really like the way you curated these books. Wow, I knew you would have this book. So this gratifies us because we do have to make selections. We cannot have every single book that there is in nonfiction. And because we are a small boutique nonfiction niche bookstore, we can be very selective. So I'll often say that we may be a little snooty, but we keep our snooty index in check by having some science fiction, some poetry, and prize-winning novels.
Mm-hmm. And the layout of the stores, you talk about just the design and the feel. It feels like each section kind of has its own energy.
Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm.
By design, I'm
Mhm.
guessing.
Mm-hmm. Well, I think that is by design, wouldn't you say?
I would say the books are very different. You know, like the book Blockchain for Babies is totally different in shape, so that those shelves are going to look so different for the baby university versus the cookbooks, you know, that are kind of big or bulky or faced out more. So,
And then the other thing is that we can go deep in the categories that we serve, history and culture. So we can go deep there. We can go past, present, and future with those books. So we're very interested in new releases. Alyson kind of takes charge of that with the new releases every Tuesday.
New Release Tuesday.
Mm-hmm. And she does the Instagram work. So she puts up what's come in that day. In fact, we failed to bring a copy of this to show you, but we're pretty excited about the Wizenard series. Go ahead.
Oh, so basketball player Kobe Bryant started a publishing company, and he's focusing the company on young readers. And so he's working with Wesley King, who's an author, to produce a series called Wizenard. And so it just came out Tuesday, and it's beautiful to feel, which is very different for young readers. And it's very thick to read. So he says it's a combination of sort of like Harry Potter and basketball clashing together.
That sounds very,
Yeah.
sounds like you need it. That sounds better in book form anyway.
Yeah,
that's right.
Imagination is
Uh-huh.
needed for
Yeah.
something like that.
Yeah.
And I think the next one is going to be about a tennis player.
Well, yeah, he's going to change sports.
Okay.
And story
Story,
books. So
fantasies,
it's
and
still gonna
sports
be-
stories.
it's still going to be fantasy,
Mhm.
probably,
Mhm.
but it's going to be a story mixed in with a sport.
Mhm.
Okay.
Mhm.
And with even making selections like that,
Mhm.
and then the strong holistic medicine
Mhm.
in mind.
Mhm.
Have you seen? Because I'm guessing that you see possibly a someone that supports the readers that support the bookstore go through different life journeys, and they may start okay, I want to learn about Black history.
Yeah.
It's funny. It's like a lot of younger people are like, I want this and I want that.
Yeah.
And, you know, people hit me up and they're like, oh man, you probably know all of this.
Mhm.
And then I'm like, okay, you probably need to start with one of the first books that you said, the Chancellor Williams.
Destruction of Black Civilization.
Yeah, it started because my dad's books around probably like 18, 19.
Mhm.
And I would go, so I would raid my dad's books, then sometimes go down the street and they're like rarely even open now in the Shrine of the Black Madonna and get some books. So that they came before Columbus. I remember that book. The Isis Papers. I remember that book. It's a book my dad always said, it's a tough read. Yurugu.
Oh, Marimba Ani.
And that book and the theories in that book. Also Crises of the Negro Intellectual. So like it's like all these different books that just start like kind of coming at you. Black Labor, White Wealth. Of like read this. So like I'm on that journey, and then you're younger, and then that person probably grows up to say, okay, now I have children, so now I need to go to the baby university. And baby university is leading me to holistic healing.
Exactly.
You know?
The other thing is that we're very conscious of the books that were popular with people, say in the 80s and 90s. And however, we're almost up to 220 now, and a lot of books have been published by a lot of different people around some of the same interests and needs and subjects. So there's a book that we have here called The Warmth of Other Suns, and Alyson brought some stats with her today. That talks about the number of books that we've sold. This book is by Isabel Wilkerson, Isabel Wilkerson, who wrote it's kind of a thick book, and she wrote about the great migration of African American people from the South up the East Coast, from the South through the middle of the country, and from the South out toward the West Coast. And she went and found some people who had made that journey as migrants. Between 1914 and 1970, that's a long time period that she talks about the migration. And I really hadn't thought about the length of time, but she looks at 1914 and 1970. So just the other day, somebody was in the store who said that their parents came here in the late 80s. So she was just about right on. They came up from Mississippi just at that time. So I'm very interested in people having books that are also current reads about the history and culture of African American people in the United States, as well as internationally. So there was a big interest in the book Barracoon by Zora Neale Hurston, which is a novel. And we do have a few novels in the store. And that got a lot of attention nationally, and we had it in the store as well. But along with it, we had discovered a translated book called Old Slave Man, which came from Martinique, and it was first in Creole and then in French and then translated into English. So we like to put those kind of books sort of side by side to see that there's not just one book that can lead you into that kind of knowledge base, but there are many books that do that. And there are also books that are now and previous as well.
And if I can add the book that came out, I think last week or so, American Founders, and it's about people of African American descent that established freedom in the New World. Yeah.
So all of this is definitely fascinating when we think about the information to be offered. But along with this, and generally when we have the Detroit is Different talks from the culture, it's still a business itself too. In this, as things have changed in that 30 years of the way people receive information, people even read information, even interpret information, because I've noticed, you know, novels, historical books change in text and context, the way they're written, even the way that research is acknowledged as research nowadays. What impact has that had on the public, the people, your buyer, your customer base?
Well, I really think that people are always in a dynamic growth position. They're not static. They don't learn and then quit, but they just continue to learn and have experiences and need to learn again or learn some more or learn in advance. When we first started, I think that the category of history and culture was probably our strongest category.
Mhm.
But because we were also interested in metaphysical, spiritual books, we had those. And I always felt that health and well-being was vital and very important to everyone, but particularly to African American people who seem to suffer a number of ailments and diseases. And then books, I thought buying about women was very important because oftentimes the voice of women uh, is not really heard in literary and quite the same way, although that's changed dramatically now. We have many women who are writing on lots of different subjects, a lot of new young women from other countries. We have a lot of Nigerian uh, books that are coming through. So the customers' interests are changing based on what is available and also life experiences. So we try to respond to that as much as possible, and at the same time, stay clear about what our, as Alyson calls it, our DNA is, what our core offerings are and subjects. And there's so many books now that are on the market, and they come in all the time. So we're always scouring catalogs. And the other thing about people is that people are finding out about books in so many new and different ways now. They're getting information across their phones, on the computer, on the radio, on the podcasts.
Yeah, I think
everybody
this podcasting has definitely impacted a lot of people's interest in books.
Yes, and almost any station that you turn on, whether it's radio or TV, somebody's going to say something about a book now. At one time, books were reviewed
in the newspapers, and not so much anymore.
Yeah, and the magazines. And there was a little period where booksellers had to kind of figure out, well, how do we get people to know about this? So we're members of the American Booksellers Association, which is the national organization of booksellers, independent booksellers in the United States. And I have to say, it's been a big business support for us in the book industry. They help us to know about how books are put together. We meet with publishers. We have sales representatives. We go to book trade shows. We go to a once-a-year meeting, which is called Winter Institute, in which we have classes where we learn about things, about trends, about marketing, about other bookstores and what they do. And they always take us to bookstores in the place where we are. We were just in Albuquerque in January, and bookstores in Santa Fe and places. So the support to bookstores is really great. And I like to say, I hope I'm not being too commercial here, but I hope people will consider careers in the book industry. It's a global industry. There are many kinds of bookstores and book ways to be in the industry. They need editors, they need copy people, they need book cover designers, sales representatives, and it's a huge industry. And I think that there's a lot of place for people to carve out a career in the book industry.
And I think you were saying that all the different ways people are getting their books in different places, right? Sometimes they're reading it on their phone. Well, we have an option with Libro FM that any book that's out there, maybe it's not even a book that we have in our store, through our bookstore, you can listen to an audiobook. And it's for independent bookstores, and you can link on to your bookstore and then get that book through that bookstore. And it's very competitive with Audible. And you can pause it, or you can continue it through the year. But so Libro FM is another way that you can get a book from Source Booksellers in a different way. Maybe you could listen on your phone or on your computer.
And we're finding that people are really busy. And so we have a rule at the bookstore. And when they say, we're really busy, I want to read, I said 3 pages a day, every day. 3 pages a day, every day. And people usually say, I can do that. And then I hear people say, I need to finish all the books I have. I said, well, is that a rule that you made up? Or how did you get to that you feel like you have to finish? I said, the book you might be finished with the book, but the book may not be at its end. So there are a lot of ways to approach books and reading. The other thing, because we are a nonfiction niche bookstore, most people have learned to read through stories. And nonfiction category may not have been offered as freely as it is now. What we found, though, with the statistics that we get through American Booksellers Association and Publishers Weekly, is that nonfiction is outselling fiction now, even with children's books, the young readers. Those we have a series of the little books called The Blockchain for Babies, ABCs in Space, ABCs of Math, and so on, those books. So it's wonderful that we can offer the idea of nonfiction books. Now, I'm not saying that's the only thing you should have. I think that in this book that Toni Morrison just put out, which is such a magnificent book, it's called The Source of Our Self-Respect.
Self-regard.
The source of our self-regard. That's the name of it, Toni Morrison. And she does a whole piece in there. These are books of essays, meditations, and speeches that she's written. And she makes a comment that it may be that the only place that we're able to see and absorb truth today is in fiction. And in literature, she said literature, and particularly in fiction. And I thought that was so generous of her to talk like that, because I hadn't thought it. It's because those books are getting to the internals of people's thinking. And this idea of memoir is very big right now, that people want to find out other people's stories and how they made it through, so to speak.
Yeah.
And so there's just so much that can be acquired through reading and through books and through literature. And we have some graphics in the store. We're not a comic book store, but there, for example, our Kindred book by Octavia Butler has been turned into a graphic novel. And it's just amazing to me how that was even done, but it's there in the store, and people who are wanting to have more of a pictorial view of the information, there it is. We also have the hip hop book. What's his name, Alyson? It's called
It's the Hip Hop Family Tree.
The Hip Hop Family Tree, and there are 4 different books that go across a time period of 1987 through
So
about
like the start of hip hop.
Exactly.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
Yeah.
But those are all graphic, and they are absolutely beautiful. You can buy them either in sets or by number 1, 2, 3, or 4.
Mhm.
So there are many ways to acquire knowledge, but I think that the telephone, the iPhone, and the iPads and all the devices will help you get to at least the surface of information. But books, unlike movies, will help you to really go deep into a subject, or to arouse your imagination, help you to really fantasize about what's really being said in the book, and not just giving it to you, boom, on a flat surface.
Yeah, I believe that definitely I'm more of a nonfiction reader myself. It takes a lot for me to read fiction. It would, I can't even tell you, what was the last fiction book? I can't even tell you, but nonfiction I enjoy often. Sometimes memoirs, sometimes just studies on things. And I'm big on, I believe, just even in designing websites myself and the work that I do, it's so easy to manipulate online information.
Yes.
So the more we get away from the actual text we can hold in our hands, that text we can hold in our hands, those words won't change. And my fear, and people could say this is conspiracy or whatever, but just the realism of some of this information not being readily available. Some of the books I have even in this house, like I have my library of my marketing books for business, and then I have like a lot of some of my favorite black books, and some of them are talking points of things. Like I have some of those George Sabura business books, and some of it is like it's a good snapshot in time, but that's a classic series that of how he was writing books from the perspective that I need to have a better understanding of that time in black business so that I can grow in business. And that's why I believe the text is so important.
Well, a book with text is a direct connection between the writer and the reader. And it's coming through the hands and the eyes and the mind. So all of those parts of a person, both who have created the book and who read the book are connected. So there's almost a spiritual connection between all of that. And when you insert, it seems to me, this is my opinion, when you insert the digital piece, we don't always know what to do with it in terms of our mind space. I mean, where is that? I mean, sometimes you don't know if it's present, past, future. You don't know if it's been written by a group of people or one person, or you don't know where their ideas are coming from. So it gets to be another challenge as to how to take in digital information and electronic information. And we're learning about
the
that.
User, we often talk about that. It's funny. I have some books on that. The user experience. I guess a more relevant way of looking at that for more people, to especially in our community, is if you have the Bible app on your phone and you're sitting next to somebody that actually has a Bible, depending on the version, you'll be reading the text and you'll run into something where this person is saying something completely different. Also, it's going to be missing a lot of the context to understand it. I think the Bible, I was old enough, but like when somebody say, okay, you have to know how to read the Bible, but it's more than just the Bible like that. A lot of books are like that.
Yes,
you have to have
true.
the context for.
And the time period in which it was written. And then we have a tendency to put on that time period what we know today, but instead of having that time period really speak to us and how things are. We just went to the event at the library, the Detroit
where
Law
they released
Mercy. Mercy Law School.
Where they released their book list.
Yeah, with the Mercy Law
every
School.
year.
Yeah, did a very a wonderful program commemorating the
160 year anniversary of the meeting of Frederick Douglass, John Brown,
Lampert.
William Lampert at William Webb's house in Detroit, which the location has a historical marker there. It's on the Larned side of the Blue Cross building downtown. And so that was the meeting.
Right. And they brought in an author who had written a book some years ago, maybe less than 10 years ago, Reynolds, on John Brown. So it's really an up-to-date book on John Brown and the collaboration that all of these people were having during that time period. And you think, I often hear people say, we don't get together. Well, yes, we do. But where, when, how, and for what purpose, and how that particular meeting sprung into a lot of abolitionist activities that in other parts of the country. And it was just really, really interesting and wonderful to hear, and such a understanding that there are people working to do so many things in this city that that everybody doesn't always know about. But the work is still being done, and the impact of it is still there. Yeah.
And I guess that's a good example. So there was an event, and Detroit Mercy Law School had like a book signing and all that. But at our store, the way we celebrated it is we had the Reynolds book, The Abolitionist, and then we also had the W.E.B. Du Bois account
Of John Brown.
With a introduction by David Roediger, who wrote Wages of Whiteness, together for people who might have been interested in the anniversary to get
more perspective on what's happening as it's needed.
See a larger view, a more global view from this time period. And Roediger is current. Is a current writer. He's a white man who was born in Mississippi at the time the 3 men were murdered there, and he uses that condition that he was born into as a place to jumping off into his study of what whiteness means and is all about. So, I mean, the world is vast in terms of reading. You can learn so many things from so many places.
So with this, you brought a stack of books here.
Yes.
It's and I guess I should know that people that love this walk with it. Let me ask you this: at your own home, like what books are you reading? Like I generally, anytime a musician's here, I'm always asking what songs are you playing right now? So what books are you reading right now at your house? What's sitting around? Do you have like a book you look at like, okay, this is I may look at this for for fun. This is like where I'm studying history. This is my holistic book. What's your reading list
Yeah, okay.
right now?
Well, first of all, my books are all over everywhere at home. Sometimes I feel embarrassed for myself, but since nobody can see it much but me, it's okay. But one that I'm reading, a large book I'm reading now, I just spoke of the Toni Morrison book, The Source of Our Self-Respect. And they're small pieces. They're maybe 3 or 5 pages at the most. So I'm reading that one. I'm also reading a little book. We have a new series of small books, single subject books from Bloomsbury, the company. I have to say all that to get to it. But this one is called A Veil. So the woman is writing about the veil and what the veil has meant in history, in cross cultures, and what it was for her as a Pakistani woman, and what it meant when she was put in position to be married, and what it meant, what she saw it meant when people were fully veiled. And so that book is really, really interesting. It's a small book, so I read a little bit at a time. And then I have another one that just we oftentimes get pre-publication copies or advanced reader copies. So I'm reading into a new book by David Marinus, who wrote the book Once in a Great City, who's an associate editor at the Washington Post, and actually was born and grew up in Detroit, and wrote that book about Detroit when he was moved by the advertisement during the Super Bowl for the Chrysler 3000.
Yeah,
one of those.
Detroit,
yeah, and he was so moved by that it took him back to look at his early life and then to talk about Detroit at a particular time period. So I always have a lot of books going at one time, and then we read a lot of reviews and catalogs and so on too.
I'm not reading it, but I'm really excited about the Object Lesson series that my mom was talking about. She's reading one on veil. There's another one on the hood, and
like
both
the
of
hoodie,
those,
like the hoodie.
Yeah. So they're really, really interesting. What am I reading? I am trying to finish, and still excited about, The Color of Money by Mesra Baradaran. And so it's the book on the history of Black banks and the
like wealth
and the wealth gap.
Yeah, I was suggested that I need to read that from a couple people. They were like, "You probably like this."
Yeah,
you know,
that's good.
It's really good, and I'm also I am reading, and it just came out, the book When Spring Came to the DMZ. So it's a children's book about what spring looks like in the demilitarized zone. I never really knew what that looked like.
Between North and South Korea.
Between North and South Korea. Yep. So it's sort of a neutral area with lots of fences and soldiers on each side. But there's also a lot of nature and animals.
And they're crossing back and forth all the time. Nobody stops them.
Yeah.
The grass grows and everything.
Gotta let them go.
Yeah. So there are lots of books, and I have had to learn to do deep skimming of a book because, there are a lot of words in a book. So learning to do deep skimming, learning how to approach a book, learning how to see what it is about. And I do try to share that with customers as well, that you don't have to flip to find something in a book to know what the book is, but there's a systematic way that you can learn about a book without, reading a whole book. And then that will tell you whether you want to read more in it as well. And so...
right now, it's as the discussion of reparations is popping up, I guess it's like a hot button topic. It's always been a hot button topic with me. But the debt, Randall Robinson, people have been asking more and more, and I'm like, okay, well, some of this discussion was he kind of broke a lot of this down with that book, and I think that I ended up with that like 2000 and
about 8, 9.
Yeah, something like that. Maybe like 2012 after the fact. But I know now it brings in like the context for like, okay, some of this research has been done, but then also like we have the history of people like Reparations Ray Jenkins here in like the city of Detroit, which that balance of also being a resource for some of the people here as the fabric of a lot of movements tied to the city of Detroit. And that brings people into your bookstore looking for that nonfiction information when they're going to say, okay, I need this argument on reparations. What book you got?
Well, I think we have one is The Color of Law. And that talks about the housing policy discrimination.
I actually bought that from you guys.
The Mesra Baradaran, The Color of Money, because it says what happened to our money. She gives a wonderful example of how we were told to save our money right after slavery and put it in a particular bank, and Congress was going to keep it for us, and then they lost it all. So we're at zero again. So it's just like these arguments we have to have. We have more information now because that have more detail to how we either lost wealth or what should America pay. We have a book like that. It's called Should America Pay? And then we also have the debt. And we also have just a lot of other history books on things like Black fortunes. So that's Shomari Wills wrote a book about 6 individuals who became millionaires right after enslavement. But he also sheds a lot of light on just the whole situation at the time, based, taking a look at their plight and where
the things they had to deal with.
The things that they had to deal with.
Yeah.
And
the
their
top
barriers.
Top floor of the Smithsonian African American Museum. I don't know if you all have been there yet, but in the top floor they have like some featured things, and just going through the top floor when they're talking a little bit more to business and some entrepreneurship, you have to and that's one thing I personally, this is a Kari Frazier take, not even a Detroit is different take. One of the things about the Smithsonian Museum, as great as it is, it's like some clear information that's left out. Like, damn, this is great. You got all of this information, but you clearly, if you have all this information on who this Black person is, you know who these people in these white sheets are. So it's like, who are they? Who are they related to? So
well, there's so much coming along now, and people are, I think that there's a great value in the internet and the explosion, the information age, and the communication age that we're in now. So there's just a huge explosion of information. We don't want to leave out in the conversation a person such as Brian Stevenson, who wrote the book Just Mercy. And he spent all of his life, energy up to this point and on, I hope, in researching people who are in, first of all, death row, but then he's made a whole museum in Alabama, in Montgomery, called the Lynching Museum. And he has sent out troops of people to find the spots where people were lynched, dug up dirt, put it in jars to know that their blood was there. I mean, this kind of hard work, it's gruesome and grueling and all that. We don't want to look at it. But Brian Stevenson is a voice that we really need to raise up and understand that he's bringing to the table information that will help us to begin to understand what happened and to resolve some of the pain and the wounds that that we still carry.
Which that leads to the natural next question, as I speak frankly about the information too. And it's been horrors that have led to the traumas of the Black experience in America. But with it, it's also still some people that I've run into that's like, well, I'm not that, and I don't even want to talk about that, and let's forget about that, which I disagree with that whole concept. But when you hear that form of rhetoric, what's your response?
Well, I always say your choice of response is your choice. And we have to remember that many people, this book, The Warmth of the Other Sun, she talks about people who left the South to go north. Many people, there were thousands of people. There was the greatest migration ever of Black people coming from the South to the North in search of freedom and all kinds of things. We have the book here, The Dawn of Detroit, which is in the 1700s. Talking about slavery here in Detroit and some of the street names that we have here. So you can be really saddened and hurt and depressed and angry about it, and that's real. That's really true. But then we have to look at what people do to continue on. I heard a man say one time, the best resistance is to live well. I thought, wow, I got to think on that. The best resistance is to live well. And because when you live well, you're living free of a lot of stuff. You have to really free up your mind. So part of the beginnings of Source Booksellers was the reuse of a phrase that I learned when we took the trip to Ancient Egyptian Study Tour. It said, free your mind, return to the source. So the source is a source of knowledge and information and understanding, so that then we can begin to take action in our own behalf. Mm-hmm. And I think those, people who are expressing some of that, there's a lack of knowledge. There's some faulty thinking. There's a lot of shame that people experienced having to leave their homes or leave wherever they lived and come here. I can tell you, people who left had to leave the South with just what they had on their back because they had to get out of there. And so they're not going to keep repeating that story over and over again. Some will not, others will, for a variety of reasons. And some of the information has left us with the people moving on.
Whereas I would say, for me, mm-hmm. I find it fascinating.
Sure,
I find the history fascinating just because it's I still recognize they're still people, but mm-hmm. I recognize like the ingenuity, the mm-hmm. thought process, mm-hmm. what they saw as reality. Mm-hmm. As I find out more about, just from my Detroit is Different interviews, because mm-hmm. it generally always starts with, who's the first family member you had in Detroit? How did they get here? Mm-hmm. And I've even finding out now that like, not only were families close together, but certain neighborhoods and blocks where like it would be like all people from Alabama are here, all people from Mississippi are here, mm-hmm. all people from, and then even like how the migration would happen. Like, people from Arkansas would go to Chicago, mm-hmm. like people from Mississippi, mm-hmm. Georgia, like certain states would migrate to mm-hmm. the city of Detroit mm-hmm. versus others. Like I find that fascinating that people collectivize mm-hmm. under like not necessarily like one rule, but it'll be like it's interesting.
Yeah.
And then how we how then that impacts the grocery stores.
Sure. Well, you have to
things like that.
It helps to kind of make a little bit of a comparison there. In any groups that could go somewhere, they will find other people in their group.
Yeah.
For example, right now in Hamtramck, there was a time when we had a large Black community in Hamtramck, mm-hmm. Polish community, and now we have a large Bengali community. Mm-hmm. So people will go where they have some friends.
Well, I want to go back to your response to people who are like, don't want to talk about the
embrace
richness
the history.
And
mm-hmm.
kind of embrace it. So we have a book recommendation for them. It's called My Grandmother's Hands by Resma Meckham. And it's about trauma, because that's sometimes why people don't want to approach things, because they're feeling some type of trauma related to it.
Painful.
Mm-hmm. And so his whole book is healing from white supremacy, from the traumatic experience that is
white supremacy that was really passed down through the generations and resides in our DNA.
Mm-hmm.
And I definitely, that sounds like the next book I'll be buying for you all. As I often say that, as I speak it very matter of factly, and a lot of people say, I don't think that, I don't subscribe to that. But I personally, back to Kari Frazier, I think racism is the strongest institution America has ever built. And so to shake it, you're changing some of the ethic at which America was founded upon. So like the concept of it in white supremacy, and some people don't even like that term, but like it's an ideology that's even bigger than like, like it's not like Joe, the white guy that I know.
Yeah.
It's like, okay, this is a dogma. It's such a strong concept. So I definitely, that seems like that will definitely be the next book I'm buying, because I speak a lot of that, and I'll probably get some other talking points.
And then we have to also understand that generationally, sometimes it takes a generation or two, and sometimes three, to be able to look back at something without the same kind of pain and shame and resistance and all that. And so you're sort of in a position where you can look at it whereas maybe 2 ancestors ago, they might not have been able to look at it at all.
No.
Like I get real mad with the expressways because I remember when the expressways came to Detroit and how that the neighborhood that I grew up in, which was a very nice neighborhood for Black people. We were on the west side, as they said. It was, we're working class people and all, but it took people's houses out.
Yeah.
I mean, they just took the houses out. One was my uncle's house. He had a lovely 2-family flat house. Part of the family lived upstairs and he lived downstairs. And that house is now gone. It's in the middle of an I-94, things like that. So my anger with that may not be as...
it's not. I can see it from more of a matter of fact concept.
Sure.
My mom was, this is my grandmother's home, but now it's my home. And I have the house next door too. But when Davidson, the first freeway was built, my mom was a child. So she knew people that,
used to be over
there.
there.
Yes. Especially my aunt. So it's a different idea.
Yes.
When this neighborhood was the stories that I know of this community. And I see just from growing up in the 80s, it's kind of it's weird. It's like what I see versus what other people see is completely different.
Yeah. Well, I have to mention one of our local voices, Marcia Music, who wrote an article called The Kidnapped Children of Detroit. And she comes at this problem from the point of view of a child having playmates, and the next day they're gone because of the housing, they called it blockbusting at the time. And so she comes at it from that perspective that all of a sudden the children were gone. They must have been kidnapped. Where are my friends? And so that stays with us. And I just thought that was a brilliant way for her to talk about a problem that existed in Detroit and still exists in the minds of many of us. But in the mind of a child, they couldn't understand, where did their friends go?
Yeah. And it's things like, the Kerner Commission report and books on, the disparities of home ownership that you learn about the FI. My grandfather was a World War II veteran, but he did not get the same crack at the advantages in home ownership that his the white soldiers that died, and fought for the flag as well. He was a wounded veteran, actually.
Yes.
So, I mean, like those realities. And then you find out okay, HUD was an institution built, but really balked from people like the Trump family using HUD money that is supposed to empower Black communities, but it only empowered the wealthiest realtors in America, so it's those things, and that comes from books.
Yeah, and you certainly have to unpack and unwind and look deeply at things too. Yeah, so I often think about the rich history and culture of literacy and literature in the city of Detroit. We have a wonderful community of poets in Detroit and writers in Detroit. And many of them do write about the pain and suffering, but many of them write about the beauty too. That I read something at one time that this person had said, that Dostoevsky had said in one of his books, he said, beauty will save us. And when we can see the beauty of the world and the beauty of our living in life, that can take away some of the edge. No wonder we have people who paint and do sculpture and all the things that reach into the creative part of our personalities. So Detroit is rich in that regard. We have wonderful.
Yeah, I look at Broadside Press the way a lot of people see Motown.
That's true.
But that's how I see it. And then I look at people like Mama Annette or Gloria House, Dr. House.
Congratulations to her.
Yes.
She's an eminent.
A big homie. But yes, very graceful. Very, beautiful in a lot of ways. It would be like, yes, I remember when Stokely would speak. Like, oh man, I'd expect you to be like,
Right.
But
well, one of the things that we also do at the store is that we have lots of events.
Yes.
In fact, we brought a little paper here that has all of our events well, most of our events for March, because it does change up as we go through the month.
They're on our website too.
They're on the website, sourcebooksellers.com.
And we're gonna post this in April. So what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna link to the website and I'll put up some events. But you all do focus on poetry too, and you focus on different types of books.
Only in April, really. We pay attention to poetry because it's not really one of our major categories, although we have some. But in February, we had a new event that we have not had before, and I hope to repeat it a couple more times this year. I was very inspired by the New York Times Magazine section that featured in its holiday issue African-American male published writers. And I saw, and they had a huge number of people from all around the country and so on. Most of them were novelists, playwrights, biographers, poets. And I didn't know a lot of them, but they were there. So I said, well, I know we have published African-American male published writers here in the metropolitan Detroit area. So we had 5 on the 24th of February at the store. And the idea was for them to read from their works. And so I wanted people to get in touch with these men, really, who are here in the metropolitan Detroit area. Some are known, some are not that well known. One of our people that day was a poet who'd been writing for 50 years, Wardell Montgomery. And he read from his poetry, and it so touched one of the ladies in the audience because he really wrote about the abuse of females in a work situation. That was part of the theme of the poet. And she couldn't believe it. She said, oh my gosh, if all people could just read that. So you never know where these lines of thought or ideas are coming from and what they mean to people when they hear.
So in April, we're going to have a poetry workshop.
Okay.
We have that every year. It's 2 Saturdays.
And do I have to, what age do I have to be?
It is poetry for everybody.
Okay.
And it's not, you're not listening to poetry, you're writing poetry.
Okay.
And this year, I think we're
also going to participate in the national
event of Poem in Your Pocket.
A poem in your pocket. So we're going to be handing out poems for people to keep in their pocket. And we want people also to get a poem, put it in their pocket, and hand it out to somebody. So poetry can be passed around
like
to many
a trading
people.
card.
Like a trading card, yeah.
Wouldn't that be great? Yeah.
Okay. I like it. So for the workshop, and I'll highlight that too.
Yes.
So I can just come. It'll be an activity.
That's
if
right.
I've never written a poem
That's
before,
right. Exactly.
I can still come in
Exactly. It's
there and I'll walk away with some poetry.
That's right.
Yes.
That's right.
Written by me.
Yes. And then every Saturday morning from 10 to 11, we honor our section called Health and Well-Being with Body, Mind, Spirit exercises. So the first Saturday and the third Saturday is Tai Chi. The second Saturday is Qigong. The fourth Saturday is chair yoga. And when we have a fifth Saturday, which we do this month, we have belly dancing for anybody, male or female, doesn't matter.
Okay.
Old or young, doesn't matter. Everybody can come.
All right. And before we get into the final questions, I always ask these questions. I don't know if you all have any books that you think that like right now you need to be thinking, or if you just want to give because I guess it's so many different sections. So I'm going to just ask this question. Holistic book right now. What book right now is kind of hot or people more interested in that you find people gravitating to?
The New Health Rules. It's a small book. It's got a lot of updated recommendations of how to stay healthy.
Not just a diet.
Okay. So historical book right now.
I think Black Wealth.
The
book you're reading.
Oh,
Black Wealth.
Color of Money.
Color of
Okay.
Money.
Yeah.
Okay.
The other one that we didn't mention, we mentioned the Color of Law, which is about housing policy. There's another one called How to Kill a City that has a Detroit chapter in it, and another one about Evicted, which the WDET did a book club last summer and invited everybody to read the book Evicted, and then they went and had community conversations in 5 different places.
Around like foreclosures and evictions. But the How to Kill a City, we were lucky enough to have the author do sort of a tour date with us. And so he studies gentrification in New Orleans, Detroit, San Francisco, and New York. and he stayed with us for a while. It feels like to write about his
So
Detroit
you were just
piece.
looking up, and this
I
guy
was
was
like,
getting
yup.
coffee every day. It was like,
Yeah.
it's like I'm gonna start having to put stuff up on the shelf in a second.
Yeah.
No, we didn't know
have
he
it.
was in town.
He was in town.
okay.
Mhm,
We just
yeah.
knew the book when it
Was
came
coming.
out. We had an
Oh,
arc,
okay.
and we were like, "What?"
Mhm.
And then we fought hard to get on his tour.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. All right. And then also children's books.
hmm
What book is standing out there?
Well, first of all, I want to say, as Alyson's thinking, because she really pulls in the children's things a lot, is that we use our same categories for children, or we call them the young reader, either being read to or a little bit older. We don't do a whole lot with middle grades, but a little bit. And so the history and culture, the health and well-being, books that are by and about women, metaphysical, spiritual, new age, and the arts. And one of my favorites during the holiday time, we've got to get it back in, was Twinkle, Twinkle, Little Star. And it rhymes throughout the book, but the subtitle of the title is Twinkle, Twinkle, Little Star, I know exactly what you are, rather than I wonder what you are. I know. And so it's a book about astronomy and all the happenings in the heavens. And then when you get toward the end of the book, instead of being more sort of childlike, it opens up and there are big paragraphs on what is a nebula and what is a black hole and all that kind of thing. So that's been a fun one.
Okay.
And so I'll speak of first a bedtime book. The Sweetest Kulu is a book from a native Inuit person, woman, and the story is very beautiful, and it's really about that part of the world. And for the middle grade, I want to say that Ghost Boys from Jewel Parker Rhodes. She is an author who writes a lot of historical fiction for children. So she's got a book, Two Towers for 9/11, and Ninth Ward for Katrina, and Sugar for enslavement. And Ghost Boys is about young black boys being shot. And Emmett Till helps the children from today kind of navigate being a ghost boy, like what that is. And she's very, it does start off with a tragic situation, but you kind of understand history and understand the children and understand the situation more just through the reading of it.
Okay.
The other thing that you may have caught a glimpse at, we really tried to do a lot of books that will cross cultures, cross ages and times and all that, so that honoring the fact that we have so many people in Detroit from many different places. And some of our issues are very much the same. So that the books that we have will have like the Inuit category. There's one from some from Portugal for the children. We have
the DMZ
the
for Korea.
The DMZ for Korea, and sort of all over the world, because we really are global citizens.
Okay. And with that leads to the last Detroit is Different classic questions. So for 19, I'm adding this one in. So I'll start with the new one. All right. So an alien comes down to Earth and walks up to you and is like, okay, take me to a place that you love the most in Detroit. And I'm guessing I know exactly where you guys will say it.
Well, I love Belle Isle.
Oh, okay.
And you can take a book and sit underneath a tree. By the way, Belle Isle is getting ready to have a beautiful new garden installed by a very famous garden maker who's putting a new garden in between the conservatory area and the Carillon and the old bandshell area. And pretty soon you'll be able to go there, similar to the High Line in New York or the Lurie Gardens in Chicago, native plantings and so on. So you can take a book to Belle Isle.
Okay. All right.
Let's see.
And of course, we like
Probably.
the bookstore too.
Yeah, I was going to say, I thought that's exactly where he would go or she would go, or I don't know what.
Yeah,
maybe.
bookstore or library.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right. Which library?
The main library, because there's the
Okay.
Burton collection.
And they have a display right now of Black Bottom at the Detroit Main Library.
Which will be up until into April.
And we
almost.
encourage everybody to go because it's a beautifully done show showing the streets, and all of these streets have sort of disappeared now or kind of erased as a result of not only the expressways but new housing put down and so on. And it helps people to have a little memory restoration as to what was there. Mm-hmm.
And when I went to visit the exhibit on the third floor of the Detroit Public Library, the main library, I was excited to see the children playing in Black Bottom, or just the people like walking down the street that's no longer there. But a lot of these pictures are from 1946, and so it really does show that something was lost and people were removed.
Yes.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. All right. So your very first, well, since you're speaking, Alyson, I'm going to stay with you. Your very first car, what year, make, and model was the car, and what year did you get it?
My first car was a Rabbit, and it was 13 years ago.
Okay.
Yeah, my very own car. Not a lease.
Where was the it could have been leased, it could have been given to you or wherever, but that's how you answer. Where was the first place that you drove when you got it?
Home.
Okay. Hey, it's a good place to go.
Just drove home. Yep.
So the other thing is that they got a car that they shared when she and her sister.
My sister and I.
Yeah, they shared a car, and in their last year, I think, or two at Spelman.
Yeah.
It wasn't right away, but they got this old car.
Okay.
And I was
it was an old Honda.
Yeah. And I said, okay, you all can drive yourself to school because I'd been driving them. And then my brother said, oh, no, they can't go by themselves. So he drove behind them all the way to Atlanta.
Oh, that's a good uncle for you.
Oh, he's good.
Uncle.
He's good.
That's a
He's
uncle
good.
for you.
Yeah.
Yeah. We were thankful.
He was like, hey, watch that mountain.
That's right. But the funny part is they were up front. He was driving behind them. They weren't following him. He drove all the way down I-75. So it was funny.
So where was the first place you went when you all had the car to share?
Probably to the fruit market.
Okay.
Yeah, in Atlanta.
Okay. All right. For you.
Oh, my first car was when I started teaching in Detroit. My youngest brother, who's passed on now, had an old 19 something Ford. It was like a 1950. It was a real old car, and I inherited it from him because he had passed away, and it was the first car I had because I started teaching, and so it didn't have much of a floorboard.
Oh man, it was Flintstone.
And so it was really kind of rough in the wintertime, and so I had to keep my clothes, kind of up a little bit so that they didn't get snow and slush on them from the car. But we managed to get around okay as that.
Where was the first place you went with that car?
I probably went to school where I was teaching.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
All right. All right.
Yeah.
So next question. If you're a DJ at the end of the Detroit fireworks at Woodward in Jefferson, you get to play 3 songs. And the fireworks just ended. What 3 songs are you playing?
I have no idea.
Let's see. A Michael Jackson song.
Yeah.
An Aretha song.
Nat King Cole. He was just 100-year birthday this week of Nat King Cole.
Okay. And the last question. If you could rename Woodward after one Detroiter, who would it be and why?
Coleman Young.
He's obviously the most said person. But why for you?
Well, I think Coleman Young was a pivotal figure in the history of Detroit. And at a time when we were struggling, he stepped down from being a senator, a Michigan State senator. He had fought hard in the labor movement. He was a Tuskegee Airman. He brought all of that intellect and energy to the office of mayor, and the pride that we felt of that was just great. Now, we have a little book at the store called the Coleman Young Translation, the quotations, and it's just been kind of changed up a little bit, a new edition. So there's a lot of little information in there about Coleman and what he did. But I heard them talk about him when they moved his painting of him back over to the Coleman A. Young Municipal Building from Cobo Hall. And one of the people was speaking about him. They said he knew every department in the government. He also had 2 people in leading each department. One was white and one was black. And he knew them all well and knew what their work was. So the impact of Coleman Young is we have yet to really appreciate, because so much of what's happening today he had in his mind. He had the idea of parks from bridge to bridge. The idea of Farm-A-Lot has grown into the Detroit way of urban agriculture, so to speak, which came out of really the gardens that people had, because they came from places that had gardens, came up from the South. And, of course, we had the Victory Gardens that came along after Eleanor Roosevelt in the World War II.
The people mover that keeps on rolling.
Which is our unique driverless vehicle in the city. Somebody had to remind me that. They said, you're far ahead. You've got a driverless vehicle right here for people. So the impact of him was huge. And he was a very smart and quick-witted person. So there we have it.
Okay. You concur?
I concur.
Well, thank you so much. Make sure you visit Source
Booksellers.
You're going to be Source Booksellers. Make sure you go. Get some information. You definitely need to buy a book, and you get to meet these 2. More than likely, they will be both in effect, unless it'll be a rare occasion. Like right now.
Right now, that's right.
So that's not happening.
Yeah, so I could just tell the listeners that we're there 11 to 7 every day, 12 to 5 on Sunday. I'm usually the closer. Mm-hmm. There are others that are there earlier in the day doing many other parts that need to be done at the store. And Alyson is there a lot, too. She has another job as well, but she's there a lot, too, and handles a lot of our special events. So keep your eye on our website, Facebook, Instagram, email, Pinterest.
Yeah.
That's coming up.
So it'll be all in full effect, but more so, definitely respond. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
This was a fun 2019 start.
Thank you very much.
Thank you for having us.
Thank you for having us.
Detroit is Different is where you get information, artistry, history, music, and even comedy. Detroit is Different, a home for the culture of Detroit. Visit online at DetroitisDifferent.com today.